All right, are we ready? Can you take your seats, please? Well, good mornings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the panel theme on air quality in urban settings under the Urban Industrial Solutions and Business Opportunities session for the Bridge for Cities conference. My name is Tariq Mtaira, and I'm the Director of the Energy Department here at UNIDO, and I will be moderating this session. And joining me in this panel, I would like to welcome with me here is Ms. Tan Shaomi, Senior Climate Change Specialist with the Global Environmental Facility based in Washington. And our panel is also Mr. Steen Janssen, Program Manager, Air Quality at VITO. Welcome. And on my left side is Radha Muthia, the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. Welcome on board. And also next to me is Mr. Leonido Polido, or Bodi, Assistant Secretary of the Department of Energy from the Philippines. Welcome on board. Thank you for joining us. Allow me as an introduction to just give a brief background why this session and why in UNIDO we pay attention or concerned with this topic. As many of you know, that rapid industrialization and urbanization have led to deterioration in air quality and greenhouse gas emissions, especially in the global south. Research have shown that, and in many cases have indicated that air pollution is the leading cause of death and disability, with the latest research putting the numbers around 5.5 million people die prematurely every year due to household and outdoor air quality. And also we have to add also that noise pollution is also a contributor to that. Actually, when I moved to one city 5 years ago, one researcher told me that the city you're moving to will take 5 years of your life because of air and noise pollution. I was a bit shocked. So 5 years of your life, that's a lot to count for. I think the challenge here is that on the point source pollution, I think we have done a really good job. I mean, emissions from factories, from large installations, relatively, at least in the north, we have done a good job in managing some of these pollutants, at least on the short term, not on the climate change, the CO2 gases, but at least on the particulates and air pollutants. But the biggest challenge is that diffused sources. We know that 70% of pollution in cities can be attributed to diffuse sources, either from the transport sector or from household activities. And the challenge there to manage these are quite difficult. So from UNIDO's point of view, I think we do see an important link to our mandate to promote sustainable and inclusive industrial development with the aspect of air quality. For us, promoting low carbon transport and the widespread adoption of e-mobility form an important aspect of a sustainable solution to some of these issues. In that context, UNIDO's strong commitment to address urban pollution has been showcased, for example, through a strategic approach to catalyze and accelerate the widespread use of electric vehicles as part of energy-efficient, low-carbon transport and low-carbon cities initiative in Malaysia. That's one project we've been engaged with. Furthermore, UNIDOs have been a key partner in promoting the integrated development of new energy vehicles and renewable energy in China. So these are significant steps to facilitate the adoption of a renewable energy integrated smart grid under the Sustainable Cities program in these countries. The key issue here is that we need an integrated approach to sustainable urban planning to advance the agenda of and address the agenda of urban air quality. In that context, this panel aims to receive the views and the experience and share the experiences of the invited panelists on the challenges as well as the opportunities that municipal authorities and regional authorities can have in mitigating urban pollution. With that introductory note, I would like to welcome to the panel our keynote speaker, Ms. Tan Xiaomi. I think as an introduction, Xiaomi has been managing a very large portfolio under the global environmental facilities related to urban and transport questions, and currently leading the Sustainable Cities Integrated Approach portfolio as well. So a wealth of experience. Without much delay, the floor is yours, Ms. Xiaomi.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I think everyone here probably experienced air pollution to a certain extent in their life, but we probably are not aware the health crisis that caused by air pollution. According to World Health Organization, nearly 18,000 people died each day as a result of air pollution. So every year, air pollution claims more lives than HIV, AIDS, TB, and road injuries combined. Yet, air pollution doesn't seem to get much attention than other issues. I think one of the reasons is that air pollution is a very cross-cutting issue. It's harder to tackle. Air pollution is rooted in poverty, in the way we generate and consume energy, and also in our lifestyle. Talk about poverty. I grew up in China. When I was young, in China, many parts of China still use wood burning for cooking. That was a common practice. And my father was a railway engineer. He traveled to different remote parts of China. So I also learned how to use wood, burning wood to cook. I vividly remember how smoky his temporary kitchen can be. And at home in Shanghai, where my mom lives, and all the households actually use coal for cooking. And whenever my mom cooked dinner, I would just go outside because the pollution inside our kitchen was just simply too bad. And even in the cold winter, I had to stay outside when my mom cooks. So that became part of my life. I remember that indoor pollution was related to poverty. Today, most Chinese cities, wood burning and coal was totally phased out. But pollution brought by transportation become a widespread issue. So that's a transportation issue that's related to how you choose your life. You could take public transportation. You could also drive your car. So that's related to lifestyle, how you make a choice on your daily life. That just shows you how complicated air pollution issue is. It's not just about poverty, also about how we choose our life, how to live our life. And now I work for a public funding agency, Global Environment Facility. In the past 25 years, we have invested in many projects in different sectors in developing countries with the goal of reducing CO2 emissions and also pollutants, air pollutants. And based on 25 years experience, we understand that air pollution is, to tackle air pollution, we cannot take a piecemeal approach. You cannot just simply take a sectoral approach. Therefore, several years ago, we started a new initiative that is to focus on how we plan cities, how to make developing country cities more compact, more mixed use, in order to reduce their need for transportation and reduce the large number of consumption for energy. So that's the purpose. Now Jeff is going to this holistic approach to tackle climate change as well as air pollution. We also understand that Jeff is a very small public funding agency, and tackling climate change and air pollution really requires a broad participation of all the stakeholders. And we are reaching out to private sectors, and we are reaching out to public-private partnerships. Talk about that. I think today's panel is extremely relevant. We have policymakers from the Philippines, and we have important technology providers from Shengwu and Vito. We also have extremely important public-private partnership of the Global Alliance of Clean Cook Stoves. I think the discussion and from this panel will be extremely helpful for us to understand what's the best solutions to tackle air pollution. So I will leave our great panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shomi, for the introduction and for welcoming the panel as well, and for highlighting the connection to the needed input from a variety of stakeholders and partners to solve or to address the challenges of air pollution in urban settings. I like to benefit from this diversity, as Shomi had indicated, and I would want to start with the research and the university and Mr. Stein. I know you have done quite an extensive work around monitoring air pollution in cities, and as well as the instruments and the policy side in terms of facilitating policymakers at the city level or at the regional level to deal with air pollution. I would like to draw on your experience to share with us, at least from your perspective, what are the mechanism modalities for cities to work around the topic of, to work around the challenges of air pollution from an infrastructure monitoring point of view.
Okay, thank you very much for this invitation to participate in this discussion. As it was already mentioned, indeed, air pollution is a complex phenomenon. If it was easy to solve, we weren't discussing the topic here. And the reason it's complex is because first of all, it's complex in its species. There is not just one single pollutant. There are different pollutants. We talk about particulate matter that we identify by, for example, the PM10 or the PM2.5 or the black carbon. But there are also the gaseous species like the ozone, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides. And so that makes it complex because there is not just one single species to target. In addition, this pollution comes from a wide diversity of sources. In many cases in the world, there is not just one single source causing the air pollution. In many cases, it's a combination of traffic, as already mentioned, households or the residential sector, the industry, energy production facilities, but also the agriculture, for example. And in most cases, they all have more or less equal shares in the ambient concentrations that we observe in our urban environment. And so since this is a complex phenomenon, it's not easy to solve. And in our opinion, it really requires what we call a well-managed and integrated approach to tackle this. And okay, over the last decades, we have been working in close cooperation with policymakers in Europe, but also in China, and now recently also in India, to support them in making the best choices to tackle this problem. And in this project, we always try to work along a very systematic approach, starting with what we call an assessment phase. Try to identify where the pollution hotspots are located in your city, in your region. I think that's the first important point, that you know where is the pollution occurring. And then the second phase, go through what we call a source apportionment or a source allocation phase, where you try to identify the sources that are responsible for this particular hotspot. Because if you don't know what the sources are, you can't solve the problem. And so once you know what the sources are, you can go in what we call a planning or a mitigation phase, and then try to come up with the most cost-effective, cost-efficient solutions to tackle the problem. And so this systematic approach has proven to be effective in many places. For example, in European cities like Vienna here today, we're suffering from an NO2 problem. The NO2 concentrations that you observe in our urban environment are exceeding the EU limit values, the World Health Organization limit values, in many places in our urban environment. Source apportionment studies have indicated that diesel exhaust is a major cause of this problem. But now also taking into account what we know since the Dieselgate and the consequences of these real-world emissions, it's our role as scientific community really translate this extra knowledge, this new knowledge, and make this accessible also to policymakers to design, for example, the low emission zones, which are implemented these days all over Europe, but then come up with the most effective designs of these kind of low emission zones. Another example that I can give is China. In China, okay, particulate matter is a really major concern. Particulate matter is a real problem there. But this pollution is really a mixture of what we call regional pollution, which is governed by long-range transport, in combination with local sources, giving rise to local peaks. And in order to tackle this, you really have to understand how these two sources, the long range and the local source, play together in order to make the right sources, to make the right decisions. And for example, we've seen that smaller cities, they hardly have any impact, or at least a small impact on their own pollution. And it's mainly dominated, the pollution in small cities is mainly dominated from the long-range transport coming from other parts. And so that means that these kind of cities, they really have to team up with their neighbors, with the provincial level, in order to design what we call joint action plans, that they really can target or try to tackle the problem together. Whereas on the other side, the real mega cities, they have an important share in their own pollution. And for them, it's really important to understand what are the different sectors contributing to this pollution. Traffic for sure, but also, as we said before, the residential sector is definitely contributing to that. And so therefore, my general advice is that, okay, in many cases, air pollution is a persistent issue, which requires an integrated approach. One single action will in most cases not be sufficient to deliver clean air to your citizens. On the other hand, we also have to be positive and optimistic, because there are very good examples in Europe, in the US, but also in many other places in the world, where thanks to joint efforts, now the situation definitely improved a lot, and people are breathing, I wouldn't say really clean air, but almost clean air. So I think this is a hopeful message I would try to give as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Steen. I would like to come back to you with a second question, but after I go through the panel, the contribution from the colleagues in the panel. I think one of the quick takeaways I sort of struck me from Shomei's introduction was the connection that air pollution is rooted in both dimensions, in poverty, but also in lifestyle. So both, if you even move out from the poverty cycle, you still contribute to air pollution by changing lifestyle. And I think that makes a good transition, because I would like to focus on the poverty side, and this is the household, the way households actually use energy. And this is a good transition to Ms. Muthia to give us a bit of her experience, because the Global Alliance for Cook Stove has made an impressive inroads in terms of achieving targets of introducing efficient cook stoves. But still, I mean, the challenge remains widespread. The numbers are actually, I was reading the numbers, quite staggering in terms of how many households still use conventional fuels in cooking. So without much delay, I would like your intake on this and what we can sort of...
Thank you very much, Tarek, and thank you to the hosts for organizing the larger conference, as well as this panel, and for recognizing the impact that household air pollution has on broader ambient or outdoor air pollution. So first, just a minute or two on the issue and the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. So our focus is really on trying to transition the way about 500 million households around the world cook. Transition them away from polluting fuels to cleaner burning fuels. So there are about 3 billion people today that are dependent on food that is cooked over wood, charcoal, dung, any kind of biomass that they can lay their hands on. And the results of this are significant because you've got about 2.5 million deaths annually that result from exposure to prolonged cook stove smoke. You have significant amounts of CO2 and black carbon that are released into the atmosphere, further aiding and accelerating some of the climate-related issues that we're concerned about. You have forest degradation as people use wood for their cooking. And you also see this as a major impact on women's time. They take, depending on where in the world you live, 5 to 8 hours a day, collecting the fuel and cooking inefficiently. So how does this, so our work is really to take more of a market-based approach to be able to help transition people so that they can live healthier lives. We have a more friendly, environmental friendly effort, and women can be much more engaged in their local economy. So how does this connect to cities and smart cities and pollution? So there, in fact, the connections are very direct. So as the prior panelists had talked about, you want to look at multiple sources of the pollution within cities and urban areas. Most people have always thought that it's transport or industry that tends to be the primary pollutant in many of these cities. In the developing world, actually, household-related pollution, so burning fuels for cooking, heating, and lighting, can cause up to 30% of the outdoor air pollution, the air that we all end up breathing. So it's a fairly significant factor. Of course, this varies depending on country, depending on city. For those who are interested, we've done some studies, and I can share them offline later. But it is a significant issue that does not just affect rural areas, but very much cities and urban areas as well. Now, the prior panelists also talked a little bit about the nature of combustants, and the issue is that this is not really related just to developing countries. So short-lived climate pollutants, black carbon, the black soot that is released when you have, not proper combustion from cooking with solid fuels, that actually has been seen, the soot from South Asia has been seen to affect the Arctic. So because of travel, trade winds, patterns, et cetera, the smoke and the pollution doesn't just reside in the countries from which it was released. So it is a factor not just for the developing world, but a factor for all of us to be able to be concerned about. So when we talk about smart cities, obviously there are elements of cleaner burning technology, cleaner fuels, different ways of using renewable fuels in a more efficient manner that need to be introduced to support improved cooking practices. Cities, we feel, are also really interesting because it's that sub-national level where you can get multiple different stakeholders, as our colleague from the GEF just mentioned, to work together to be able to address this issue. It cannot be solved by just the environmental ministry or the energy ministry or the gender ministry or the energy ministry. This is something that cuts across all of these areas. And it is at that city or municipal level where we actually see many of these branches of government coming together to be able to facilitate change. It is where the Global Alliance has seen much traction. Tariq had mentioned some results over the last few years. We've seen about 70 million households transition to cleaner stoves and fuels in the last 6 years. So the number is a good number, given the amount of time that we've collectively been engaged with this. But as I said earlier, the need is 500 million households, so there's still a significant ways to go. I'll just conclude by saying, in addition to the city level being a very promising level of government, if you will, to address this issue, what's also very important is partnerships. This cannot be done just with the public sector engaging in it. Our efforts have shown that this is truly important for the private sector to be just engaged. So something else for policymakers to think about, or government officials to think about, is how do you incentivize a structure that facilitates smarter, cleaner energy being used for household purposes? And that is something that, again, later, happy to share some examples around that front as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Radha. I'm really, for me, actually, the numbers are actually also for me surprising, particularly when you know that, when you mentioned that 30% of household-related emissions in some of the countries, especially in the south, contribute to air pollution. We tend to focus only on transport and the industry, but this is an important aspect. I mean, I think from UNIDO's perspective, we're also concerned, how do you really upscale cleaner technologies? How do you really do an accelerated uptake of cleaner solutions, especially when you have the diffuse kind of situation where you really have to interact with many end users, either in the city, the household level. This is always going to be a challenge, and we're looking for always best practices. And this makes a good transition for me to invite Polidos to share some of his experiences, because in the Philippines they have done experiments with fuel switching, introducing programs around vehicle fuel switching, and these tend to be quite attractive programs to do kind of, a quick kind of large-scale change in the use patterns in the city. So, and we have mixed experiences. So let's draw on your experience. And I like, because you were on both sides. You were on the private sector side, and then you became on the government side, to looking at the same program from two perspectives. So this brings a nuances that is often we need in this kind of discussion. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Tarek. And good morning to you all. Mine is a cautionary tale. I'm here to talk about our e-vehicle experience in the Philippines. And for me, our department believes in e-mobility. That's not an issue. That's not a debate. We believe it's a critical component of our efforts in trying to solve air pollution and climate change. However, with that said, I'm here to share the painful lessons that we learned in trying to deploy electric vehicles in public transport. So the Philippines, if you've been there, we have terrible mass public transport. So every time I travel and every time I have an opportunity to come to a country like this, in Vienna, you don't really need a car. It's beautiful. You hop on a tram or a train. We don't have that in the Philippines. Instead, what we have are conventional fueled vehicles, buses, jeepneys, and jeepneys are they're essentially American Jeeps that were converted after World War II to serve as mass public transport. And then we have the tricycle, which is our subject for today. And the tricycle it's essentially an indigenous rickshaw. And this is how it looks. It has 3 wheels. It's usually run by a 2-stroke motorbike, which is really bad. It has a lot of pollution. And it's so bad that according to our Department of Health, 70% of our particulate matter in our air pollution comes from public transport. And we do recognize, our department recognizes that a significant portion also comes from the use of inefficient cook stoves. But that's another story. Our story here is what happened when we tried and supported a program. So the Asian Development Bank came up with a novel idea. And is there anybody from the Asian Development Bank here? Just to make it clear, I love you guys. And we work together very well. I have a lot of friends from the ADB. But this is just to share our experience with what happened, not pointing any fingers. So the ADB came up with this novel idea, and the idea was, why don't we convert or change a significant number of your tricycles to an electric vehicle version, or an e-trike, what we call now an e-tricycle. And it's great. It was a great idea. The plan was to lend funds to the Philippine government, and those funds would be used in procuring or purchasing from a single supplier several, in this case, 100,000 electric tricycles. Now, the problem started with the proponent dictating how the program should be deployed. And it started with the kind of vehicle that they wanted to make. These were the technical specifications they required. So they required a lithium-ion battery, which is good. They required a lot of different things. The problem is, when they require these specifications, they wanted the Philippine government to use their procurement guidelines. And in their procurement guidelines, there's no ceiling. So a typical tricycle in the Philippines costs around 1,200 US dollars. They ended up with a Ferrari for essentially an area that can't afford a regular vehicle. This unit costs, I have the pictures here. It's really nice, but it costs about 9,600 US dollars, which is the price of a small car in the Philippines. And the idea was to use it for local government units. So what they did was they procured the units, they procured a manufacturer for the units, and that manufacturer was to produce 100,000 units at 9,600 US dollars. And in the deployment model, the first issue was it could only be sold to local government units, cities, municipalities, and provinces. It could not be sold to anybody else. And once the local government units were to purchase it, it has to be purchased through a loan. And that loan had several very stringent requirements. One of the very stringent requirements is that it had to be guaranteed by the internal revenue allotment of that local government unit. In the Philippines, the local government units use a fund called the Internal Revenue Allotment, and that fund is usually used conventionally for building parks, hospitals, schools, civic centers, and so on. And the political reality in the Philippines is that local government leaders do not want to use those funds for unconventional ideas. They want to use that as a political tool to win over communities, to win over voters, to win over their constituents. So that, plus the fact that the cost of the e-trike was at $9,600, well, they say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. In my case, my road to hell is paved with 3,000 electric vehicles that we cannot sell. Right now, we're incurring interest fees and commitment charges and warehousing costs, 3,000 of them. Now, the painful thing is this. As Mr. Tarek said earlier, I came from the private sector, and I used to be the executive director of the Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines. And 5 years ago, we told them on record, during a public consultation, we told the Philippine government and the Department of Energy and the Department of Finance and the Asian Development Bank that the cost and the deployment model will not work. It won't work. We were the stakeholders. With us were members from the local government units. They said the same thing. We were ignored. The project pushed through, this happened, and the biggest irony of my life is the present president of the Philippines got me to help clean it up. So now, over the last year, we've been trying to remodel the program, and I think the end is in sight. We were able to amend the program. Now we will be allowing the private sector to come in. We believe that the private sector is the most important component in this program. Even if you were to sell electric vehicles to local government units, they do not have the core competency to operate them. You need the private sector partner. So to us, it did not make any sense to remove the private sector. We believe the way to solve it is to make it sustainable, to make it work for the next 20 years, is to have the private sector comes in. We're now setting aside all those stringent requirements. We're looking at other models, other ways to deploy it. So we believe that we will be able to solve it within the next few months. The reason why I want to share this, and don't get me wrong, there are a lot of good intentioned projects and proposals possibly lying on your desks. But please, please, cautionary tale, when you start designing those programs, please don't ignore the stakeholders. Please don't ignore the people who live there. Please don't ignore the people who will ride and work and live with those programs. So I just wanted to take that opportunity to share with a lot of the people in this room, who I'm sure are involved in policy development, who I'm sure are involved in programs such as this, cautionary tale. So thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, Bodhi. A very interesting story. Actually, the lessons are very, typical scenario. You know, you design a solution that is beyond the end user capacity to deal with it or to absorb it financially, or and then you end up with a failed project. But I think overall does not discount the other experiences in terms of how you do large-scale replacement. And there are many other successful examples that, but this is important for us to actually learn from the ones that didn't work in this discussion. I'd like to invite our fourth panelist and Mr. Wu Daong. And Mr. Wu's experience brings a unique perspective to the discussion here, because we talk about the acceleration uptake of cleaner technologies and new energy solutions in urban settings, but often we still dependent on fossil fuels and in conventional fuels, and we will be for some time into the future. So the challenge remains is, what do we do with the current fossil fuel challenge? I mean, can we actually decouple the economic development and the growth in cities and urbanization in developing economies from the environmental impacts of fossil fuel consumptions, either in the combustion of conventional fuels in cities? What makes the experience of Mr. Wu relevant to this discussion is he's also the chairman of the Xinwu Corporation and a think tank in China that's been very active with the development of efficient combustion and chemical reaction technologies in China, but also he's the chairman and the director of the ESCO committees. ESCO is the Energy Service Companies Committee of the China Energy Conservation Association. So I invite him to share his thoughts on what are the possible pathways from a technology point of view we can do there. Thanks.
好，我是来自于这个北京的
I'm
北
from
京神物集团。
the
那么我
Shenwu
们这个集团
Corporation.
是一直在
My corporation in the past 20 plus years
的燃烧技术
has been developing advanced combustion technologies and using that technologies to upgrade China's conventional manufacturing industry.
很关心。
Everyone, all of us here are very much concerned with the energy situation in China, and also the rapid development in China in the past 30 years has made China use a lot of energy in China, and we use a lot of natural gas, oil, and coal. So this huge energy consumption
中国这个大气的
inevitably produce a lot of air pollution and environmental pollution, and also produce a lot of emissions of carbon. Therefore, China needs quite a lot of solutions.
技术，但对中国来说，有些具体的技术
For China,
能够接
some of the specific technologies may not work out. Therefore, my corporation in the past years, we have more than 5,000 employees. We provide energy service. We are the biggest in this sector in China. At the same time,
有协会中国这
I'm also a energy conservation
那么我们
association. I'm the chairman of the association. Our conclusion
在目前
is that at present days in China,
在中国的发展
new energy like solar energy, wind energy, and hydropower has been used for many years, but the contribution from those energy sources
取代
have not been so big. Therefore, we hope very much to use new energy to replace the use of fossil fuel. So,
还要以煤炭
but in the next 2 or 3 decades, we in China needs to use many coal and oil. China has a lot of coal reserve in China. Coal usage accounts for about 60% of energy consumption in China, and in the next 20 years, the proportion of coal usage
所有
would
政府所有老百姓
only
都谈到煤炭
be reduced to 50%. And now the public,
煤炭的碳排放量很大。
they don't like coal. They believe coal is very polluting. They produce a lot of pollution.
是什么原因造成的呢？所以
What are the reasons for this? So my corporation has drawn a conclusion recently the Chinese government
作为一个国家战略的推广，就是
wants to,
学会另一个角度去看煤炭。
that is, we need to look
原料
coal from another perspective. That is, we want to use coal more as a raw material instead of use as a fuel.
代价很大。
Because if we want to use the coal as a fuel, then the cost would be too high.
那怎么办？一定要把煤炭
We must
手机用好，因为它是一个
make good use of the
原料的作用。
features of coal as a raw material.
低碳的
That is, coal could be used to produce a high-value fuel. For example, we can use coal to produce hydrogen. We can use coal to produce natural gas, and also we can use coal to produce gas. In this way, we can reduce the pollution, reduce the emission of carbon, and also the coal used as a raw material can
现在已经有
produce a lot of petrochemical products. In China, a project worth of $5 billion is
一旦成功
being implemented throughout the China.
属性改变了，它能够
If-
去作为原料，而不是
If
作为
we
原料的
can use coal as a raw material instead of
不光是对
as
发
a
展中
fuel,
国家未来发展有用。
this is not only helpful for the future development of the developing countries, because those countries cannot afford to use natural gas, but coal is very
如
cheap.
果煤炭只要它用的污染少，用它少去
As long as
多去做原料，
we
那么
use coal more as a raw material,
便宜。第二个运输
because coal is very cheap and it is very easy to store to transport coal.
存在好多储存。
This is not like a natural
这种
gas.
大的角度来解决的话，那并且如果煤炭大面积的使用，
If we
而不
use
产生污染的话，而是来用
coal
原料
without producing a lot of pollution, if we use coal as a raw material, then this is also beneficial for the developed countries. Then the price of the oil and the natural gas will decline, will go down. This is very good for the whole world.
在中
My
在中国
corporation
专门从事燃烧技术、从事高温化学反应技术研究的这个队伍里面，应该是我们还是
We are the biggest in this sector.
实施，这是一方面。另一方面，我再说一说城市的垃圾。
And also, another aspect is the waste in urban
废旧轮胎、
environment, like the disused tires and also the flurry, sewage
包括城市周边
flurries,
的这个畜牧场的动植物的尸体粪便，
and also the waste of the
现在大
animals.
家采取的方式也是燃烧。你想一
To
想，
treat those
煤炭燃
waste,
烧去去除
people
污染的
use
代价很大。
combustion to burn this waste.
废旧的有机物再去燃烧，
If
它去
we
掉污染的代
burn
价会更大。
this organic waste, then it will also produce a lot of pollution
现在
with
中国推行什么？也把这些原料、这些废旧
My
物
corporation
尽量要当原料
is also
当
using
原料
those waste as raw materials.
那么我们用生物质，我
We
们用垃圾
use
去生产
biomass, we use waste to produce natural gas, to produce hydrogen, and also produce
那么就
carbon.
第一，解决了垃圾焚烧啊。
The first benefit is that we can reduce the emission of
使用效率，因为
the
燃烧以后
pollutants.
效率是最差的。大家要知道，全球现在目前化石能源发电的效率，
The
常规的效率
efficiency of use of power generation is very low, is as low as 40%.
但是这种垃圾，
But
这种废旧有机物的处理就是分布式的，所以它能够
the
提高效率
treatment,
那么同时，我不用燃烧的方式，
we
不用解决污染
do
问题
not burn those materials. Because we do not burn those materials, there's no problem of pollution.
下一代的全球下一代
What we are now doing in China is to promote the next generation treatment
今天就跟大家
technology of
简单地讲一下我们
waste.
公司的一些理念，因为今天时间紧，以后有机会我们再来讲。
Because of the time, I would like to stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. I think this is an interesting angle as well, is that not to give up hope on the technology and the frontiers of innovation in terms of actually working with some of these conventional solutions to address, to decouple at least the consumption of fossil fuel from the environmental impacts that they cause. With this panorama of inputs from the panelists, I would like to open the panel for discussion and for questions from the floor. And invite your input or questions to the panels. While you're preparing your thoughts on this, I have one question I wanted to come back again to Steen, because I think, so fundamentally the challenge of dealing with air pollution at the urban scale is one is to understand the scale of the problem and helping cities to monitor and the deployment of monitoring infrastructure has been a concern, and it's tend to be also a cost for some municipalities and cities, especially in low-income developing economies. We were talking before the session sort of on the technology frontiers. Are we seeing the emergence of a low-cost option to develop capacities at the city level to monitor and diagnose the situation? Your intake on this?
Yeah, what you observe now today is that, okay, most of the cities, they have what they call a fixed monitoring network in place. Typically, few stations, maybe bigger cities, up to 10, 15 stations where they monitor the air pollution on a constant basis. What you see indeed is that now new technologies are emerging. And okay, you've probably heard about these low-cost sensors that can be deployed in the city, and you have maybe 500, 1,000 sensors continuously monitoring the air pollution. This is definitely a very, very interesting evolution that we should follow and that can deliver really added value in better understanding. On the other hand, we have to also be cautious because what I've seen up to now is that, okay, these kind of sensors, they're still suffering from good quality. So the signal you obtain is not really telling you the right things yet. At least that's my impression. But I think, okay, within 2-3 years, might be possible that we have a completely new picture popping up out of this emerging technology. So I think it's very promising. For the time being, I would suggest to, okay, be a bit patient, be cautious. Maybe, the first demonstration projects are now being established, I think, worldwide. But we're, I would say, in the exploration or in the demonstration phase. It's not that, okay, governments can fully rely on such systems yet to build on solid policies, I would say. So for the time being, rely on your standard monitoring networks, but okay, keep an eye on this emerging field.
Oh, very interesting, because in one sense, one could say that the convergence of communication solutions might allow us to actually even go for low-cost solution down the road to monitor in an integrated fashion the urban air quality. Yes, any volunteers who would like to pose any? Yes, Marco, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the panelists. I would say the panelists, they have mentioned air pollution is a complex issue. Cities are seen as a possible mechanism to better tackle air pollution, but there are also, I would say, quite complex institution, and there was reference to the need for more integration, which I think would add an additional level of complexity. Are there some methodologies, proven methodologies, tested methodology on how to tackle this integration at city level for air pollution? Some best practices? Thank you.
Because you have seen many projects and many examples of this approach. So maybe, Tan, you would want to volunteer?
Sure. Yes. What kind of a methodology, I don't know, you are implying to. For GF, we first is land use, how to make cities decide, especially in developing countries. We see new cities booming. And then when new cities are being designed at the very beginning, we just want to instill this transit-oriented development approach into cities. When we say transit-oriented development, we mean when we decide high-quality mass transit, we want to make sure the transit stops areas are intensively developed, mix residential, commercial, and office areas together, so that this area people can easily access this mass transit and get everywhere. So this transit-oriented development development methodology we are currently promoting in developing countries. Specifically, it's 800 meters around this high-quality transit stops. We want to intensively develop. This is one methodology. Also, I also understand that air pollution, we talk about monitoring air pollution issues at the beginning, and it's a really difficult issue in developing country cities. We understand that in many poor countries, even monitoring weather is very hard. Some cities simply only have one weather monitoring station, let alone supporting them to monitor air pollution. Of course, today digital technologies make it easier. We could easily develop some kind of technology or app relied on each person's smartphone or just mobile phone to monitor. That could be easily developed. We all know the data, famous data that recently released by the World Bank, that is in sub-Saharan Africa, more people have access to mobile phone than having access to grid-connected electricity and clean water. So mobile phone can be something for developers to utilize to promote these infrastructure gaps in developing country cities. And the monitoring air pollution would be an area we can tackle into. Today we have used different apps using our mobile phone to monitor how many steps we take every day, what's our heartbeat, what's our blood pressure, and we could use that to monitor air pollution as well. So, thank you.
Thanks, Xiaomei, for, I think you actually brought the attention of how we become, I think, integrate more the smart solutions that are coming up to deal with these issues at a low cost as well. While you're thinking of a question, actually, from our point of view at UNIDO, we're really concerned the impact of the transition. So if we want to make a rapid transition to low-carbon solutions at the household level and the city level, we're also concerned how also we can couple that with creating opportunities, local economic opportunities for people in the cities and for the local communities. This is the thrust of what we need to focus on in UNIDO as well, because our mandate is industrial and sustainable. So we have always to keep that in. And both of you were engaged, Bodhi and Radha, both because you were engaged in transition programs, large-scale programs in the context of the Philippines. Any lessons that you would give us on how to make sure that we really tackle this linkages to creating economic opportunities on the local level? Your intake on this?
Yeah, maybe I'll start first. The economic dimension is very important. What we've seen is that, well, behavior change is hard. You know, having people move from, in our case, the way they were cooking to a new fuel, or any kind of behavior change, as we all know, is difficult. So the inducements on the incentives we found that are most effective are actually economic ones. So by showcasing how when you move from using charcoal for cooking to, solar or biofuels, how the economic benefit to that household, and how you're able to have savings and what those savings can do in terms of children's education or any other form of engagement, that's what wins the argument at the end of the day. Not the, it's you're helping your health, you're helping the climate, those are sort of very much secondary to people. So economics plays a significant role in this. The other dimension I would say where economics comes into this is what I had mentioned earlier. Women are the primary cooks in most households. So if you have traditional fuels, inefficient stoves, it's taking longer and longer to collect that fuel and to cook that meal. So if you transition to cleaner burning, better technology-driven cook stoves, you're saving time. And what we've seen through studies is that what do women do with that time? They tend to use that more productively in their communities. So through engaging in a transition from a polluting stove to a cleaner stove, you're not only affecting health and the environment, you're actually allowing an active, productive member of the family to enhance her livelihood capabilities. And so that is something that we're seeing that also drives some of the economic growth, and I would say a more inclusive form of economic growth in many communities. The third and last thing that I would say is the transition to cleaner burning stoves and fuels is actually being driven by small, medium enterprises around the world. It's not being driven by by multinational companies at this point in time. So the job creation opportunities in the production of these stoves, in the manufacturing, the marketing, the distribution, the after-sales service, that's all happening at a sort of SME level. And we are increasingly seeing that women and men, but women in particular, are becoming quite involved in various stages of that value chain. So the clean cook stoves industry, if one can call it that, is actually a source of development of new jobs and jobs that are happening very much at the city or rural levels. And so helping to formalize some of the economic opportunities for those who were in the past only limited to the informal sector. So there are those three different dimensions, I would say, where economics plays a significant role in driving this transition to cleaner burning stoves and fuels.
Well, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Radla said it really well. That's exactly, I would just be parroting exactly what she said. I don't want to take away anything from that. I think we should just listen to that. That's a perfect answer.
Further questions from the audience? Okay. Well, I think we're also reaching the limits of our session. Yes, actually. I'd like to just, before wrapping up the session, first of all, I want to really thank our panelists for joining us and contributing to the discussion. Thank you very much. And join me in thanking them as well. You were starting to clap, but I will do the announcement before closing the panel. But I think I just want to take a few takeaways for us, at least, and also in UNIDO and in this. I mean, I think there's two important messages, and I like the way you put it, Radha, and very important, at least when you look at programs at the city scale in terms of technology upscaling related to cleaner technologies and addressing the challenges of air pollutions, when we have to pay attention to how we affect the economic situation, how do we create jobs, and how we make it affordable and inclusive to other actors in the especially low income, as the case shows. I mean, you cannot design a solution that is not at the absorptive capacity of people that are affected by the issues. I like to keep also another takeaway that we should keep an eye on the possibilities to think in terms of integrating smart solutions for the deployment of monitoring infrastructure and how this might lower the cost for cities to really pay attention to the air quality dimension. And finally, Mr. Wu's intervention that we shouldn't give up yet on the potential of conventional fossil fuel and how we can disconnect the use of certain conventional energies from environmental impact by further innovation into the combustion and chemical technologies. So these are key messages. I want to thank you very much. And I would like to also thank the organizers of the session behind the scene. Katerina has been very instrumental, and Mark in designing the session. I would like to also thank the Bridge Conference Secretariat for all their efforts and for putting the entire conference on stage, and their support, and the funders and the co-partners in making the conference possible. Thank you all very much, and don't forget to go to final announcement that there is for those that with invitation cards for the business lunch, please proceed to the VIC restaurant on the ground floor. And if you haven't collected your vouchers, please collect them at the central exit in room C1. So these are messages I was asked to announce. Thank you very much, and thanks for joining us and listening, and thanks to our panelists.